Hello everyone and welcome back from the holidays.
Our first destination in Australia was Western Australia. After a couple days in Perth, we flew to Exmouth, which is about 800 miles north of Perth. Our plan was to explore Cape Range National Park and the Ningaloo Reef.
From Exmouth, we drove all the way down the coast back to Perth in a car that had a pop-up tent on the roof with a mattress inside. It turned out to be a great way to travel. We could have this tent set up in about 5 minutes, and the four of us fit inside pretty comfortably.
In the Cape Range National Park, one of the first things you notice is that the landscape is dry, desert-like, and has very few people. We experienced a lot of this kind of landscape during our week and a half in Western Australia. When you hear the term outback, this is very often what people in Australia mean. The outback is beautiful in its own way, with impressive scenery and wildlife, including lots of roaming red kangaroos.
Long ago, when sea levels were higher, this peninsula was an island. The ridges, which are like small mountains, were formed at a fault line in the Earth's crust. This is where two parts of the crust were pushing together, pushing up the ridges. The rock is mostly limestone, which is soft. It was eroded by water and wind over hundreds of thousands of years to form these gorges.
Here are some of the animals we saw. Galah Birds, also called rose-breasted cockatoos, they're very common throughout Australia. Crested Pigeon, we were calling it the Mohawk bird until we were able to figure out what it was. Osprey, an emu, these are huge and very funny birds. Sometimes they came wandering through our campsites. Australian pelican, these are similar to the pelicans we saw in the Galapagos, except they are white. A red kangaroo, here are two that came right through our campsite. In these video clips of these two kangaroos, watch at the end as we zoom into the pouch of the larger one. It turns out she's a mama, and you can see a baby called a joey move around inside her pouch.
You don't see much fresh water in this part of the country, and water conservation is a huge issue. Every place we stayed, there were signs to keep showers to just a few minutes and to use water sparingly. Nearly every toilet is a dual flush toilet, so you can flush more or less water depending on what you need. The only other place we've seen such a focus on water conservation was around Arequipa and the Colca Canyon in Peru.
Our main reason for coming to this area was Ningaloo Reef. Most people have heard of the Great Barrier Reef on the east coast of Australia. Ningaloo is much less well known, but also spectacular. This video of the reef is from Tom Holmes and Sean Wilson, friends we made at the Australian Department of Parks and Wildlife.
Coral is actually a living thing, or many living things. Coral is created by tiny animals called coral polyps. Coral reefs are a very important part of the ocean. They provide both food and habitats for a lot of marine life. You can think of them almost like rainforests of the ocean.
There are two kinds of reefs, fringing reefs and barrier reefs. Ningaloo is a fringing reef. Fringing reefs fringe land, meaning they are very close to the shore. Ningaloo Reef often comes to within about 100 yards from shore, or the length of a football field. The area between the reef and shore is very shallow, and sometimes there are even coral patches coming almost all the way into the shore.
Barrier reefs, like the Great Barrier Reef, can be quite a distance from shore. The Great Barrier Reef is between 10 and 100 miles from shore, and between a barrier reef and shore, the water can be very deep. We did a lot of snorkeling near the Ningaloo Reef. This is us at Turquoise Bay, our favorite snorkeling location. One of the highlights was that we saw several sea turtles and were floating over them for 5 to 10 minutes.
Coral reefs all around the world are in real trouble from climate change. Climate change is being caused by the increasing amounts of greenhouse gases people are putting in the air. The most common greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, which primarily comes from the burning of fossil fuels like oil, gasoline, coal, and natural gas. Greenhouse gases act like a blanket around the Earth, and the increase in greenhouse gases is making the Earth warmer. As the air warms, the oceans absorb some of this heat from the air and also get warmer. The actual temperature changes in degrees can seem pretty small, about 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit in average air temperatures, for example. But small changes like this can have big impacts.
Watch this video and you can see the difference between a living reef and a bleached dead reef. This is the boondoggle area of the Ningaloo Reef before and after the bleaching happened.
Reefs can sometimes recover from bleaching if the bleaching isn't too bad or if the water stays at the right temperature for a long enough period of time. Unfortunately, so far, the boondoggle area of the Ningaloo Reef has not recovered.
Coral needs a certain water temperature to live. If temperatures get too high, the coral begins to die and turn white. This is called bleaching. A lot of bleaching happened on part of Ningaloo Reef in 2010 and 2011. It was caused by a cold water current getting warmer for a period of time. You have been looking at close-ups of bleached coral.
Another thing that happens with more carbon dioxide in the air is that the oceans absorb some of it into the water. This makes the oceans more acidic. This is a hard concept to explain, but think about a glass of milk, which is not very acidic, and a glass of grapefruit juice, which is quite acidic. A more acidic ocean is not as nice of a place for coral polyps to live. The result is that the coral created by the polyps is actually less strong, making it easier to break or be destroyed in a storm.
One of the most important things we can do to help coral reefs is to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We can do this by planting more trees which convert carbon dioxide to oxygen, and especially by reducing the amount of fossil fuels that we burn.
People can help by driving cars that use less gas and using less energy at home or work, like turning off lights, TVs, and computers when they're not being used. People can also use other sources of energy like solar power and wind power.